Every year, music fans celebrate anniversaries 10 years, 20 years, 30 years later. But 1996 wasn't just another year in music history. It was a moment where rock, metal, and alternative music all seemed to pull in different directions at once. Not toward one new sound, but toward fracture. This year, many albums from 1996 are turning 30 years old, and some of them didn't just define their time. They changed what alternative music could be. By the mid 1990s, alternative music was no longer underground. Grunge had exploded into the mainstream earlier in the decade, and by 1996, the genre wasn't asking how to survive. It was asking what to become. This was a year where many of the biggest names in rock and metal released major albums, all at once. Pearl Jam released No Code, an album that intentionally pushed away casual listeners. Instead of repeating the success of Tenor VS, the band leaned into atmosphere, experimentation, and internal tension. It confused fans, and that was the point. Metallica released Load, a sharp stylistic pivot away from thrash. Short hair, blues-influenced riffs, and a divided fan base. And it was one of the clearest signs that heavy music was splintering. Korn followed up their debut with Life is Peachy, doubling down on discomfort, raw emotion, and heaviness. At the time, it felt extreme, but it would help open the door to nu metal's rise. Rage Against the Machine released Evil Empire, proving that political anger could still dominate mainstream charts. Loud, aggressive, and uncompromising, it reminded listeners that alternative music could still feel dangerous. Type O Negative dropped October or Rust, a gothic, slow burn album that fused doom metal with dark romance. It wasn't built for radio, but it became a cult classic. Weezer released Pinkerton. Initially misunderstood and criticized, its raw emotional honesty would later make it one of the most influential alternative albums ever recorded. Ozzy Osbourne released Osmosis, adapting classic metal for a modern era. And Pantera released The Great Southern Trendkill, one of the heaviest, most confrontational albums of the decade. All of this happened at the same time. Rock music wasn't moving forward together, it was splitting apart. And within that chaos, a different kind of alternative music began to quietly take shape. Released in 1996, Placebo's self-titled debut didn't fit neatly into any existing category. It wasn't grunge, it wasn't Britpop, it was dark, emotional, and unapologetically uncomfortable. Songs like Nancy Boy challenged ideas of masculinity and identity at a time when alternative rock was still dominated by macho imagery. The band's androgynous presentation and raw honesty made them feel dangerous in a completely different way. Placebo helped redefine alternative music as a space for outsiders, not just rebels, but people who didn't fit anywhere else. If Placebo showed what alternative music could feel like, Beck's Odelay showed what it could sound like. Released in 1996, Odelay was a genre-blurring experiment. Hip-hop beats, folk guitars, blues riffs, electronic textures, all mashed together with surreal lyrics and pop hooks. Instead of committing to one style, Beck treated music like a collage. And in doing so, he helped push alternative music away from strict genre boundaries and toward experimentation. Odelay made it acceptable for alternative artists to sound like anything. Sublime's self-titled album was released shortly after the death of singer Bradley Nowell, and it became one of the most unexpected cultural touchstones of the decade. Blending punk, ska, reggae, hip-hop, and dub, the album ignored genre rules entirely. Songs like What I Got and Santeria felt casual and effortless, but that openness was revolutionary. It showed that alternative music didn't have to be angsty or serious to matter. It could be loose, it could be fun, it could be communal. While some bands were broadening alternative music outward, failure pushed it inward. Fantastic Planet combined heavy guitars with space rock textures, atmospheric production, and cinematic ambition. And it wasn't radio-friendly, and it wasn't supposed to be. The album became a cult favorite for listeners who wanted something deeper, stranger, and more immersive. It helped define a lane of alternative music that valued mood, texture, and exploration over commercial success. Bush's Razorblade Suitcase proved that post-grunge still had weight. Produced by Steve Albini, the album rejected polish in favor of raw intensity. It topped charts while still sounding abrasive, a rare balance at the time. In an era where people claimed grunge was dead, Razorblade Suitcase showed it still had power, just in a different form. Not a rock album in the traditional sense, but impossible to ignore. Boys for Pele was confrontational, emotional, and unapologetically strange. It challenged expectations of female artists in alternative music and expanded what vulnerability could look like. Over time, it's been reevaluated as one of the most important artistic statements of the decade. 1996 wasn't about one movement, it was about possibility. Alternative music stopped being a single sound and became an idea, one built on experimentation, honesty, and refusing to fit neatly into boxes. 30 years later, the influence of these albums is still everywhere, in how artists blend genres, express emotion, and define what alternative even means. If you enjoy deep dives into albums, artists, and moments that changed music history, consider subscribing to the Music Archive. And I want to know, which 1996 album do you think changed alternative music the most? Let me know in the comments.